with a lot of what both my colleagues said and disagree with some, and I'll perhaps be the loudmouth in the room that calls out some uncomfortable truths. I've seen this movie before. We all have. And there's a big elephant in our living room. And no matter what side of the issue we're on, and it's really uncomfortable for all of us, not the least of which are those of us who are up here appointed by your governor, who was elected by you or not, your state senate, who were elected by you or not, and your state assembly speaker, who was elected by you or not. In other words, whether we agree with the majority, we are all here representing democracy. We didn't just magically transport up here by Star Trek means. We were appointed by people that were elected by many hundreds of thousands of voters, if not millions, in this state, and we are part of the democratic process. We have a constituency that is essentially the population of the entire state, not just any one region of the state. I really want to express that I respect deeply and understand the perspectives of everyone on either side of this issue. The California coast is a gem, and to experience that, as Commissioner Amanzada said in different ways, is something we should all respect. And I understand the long history and traditions and culture of those of you who have come here and done the off-roading and the camping and the family traditions, and I understand because I love and understand the magnificence of our coast, and I understand that many of us experience it very differently. So I want everyone to know, whether we agree or not, that I deeply respect your experiences, and I appreciate and respect your incredible patience here today. This has been a torturous issue and hearing, and it's not over yet. This is, in fact, not just a conflict between different perspectives. This isn't about whether you are an environmentalist, or you're a loony environmentalist, or you're an anti-environment crazy person who's doing donuts over sensitive species. It is not what this is about. This is really more about not just differing experiences and perspectives, but as was pointed out, this is a conflict between some of our own provisions of law and how we administer protecting resources in our state. We have a department that has a mandate to protect public lands for recreation purposes. We have had some administrative, at least, decision-making that this is an area that will include some of this off-roading vehicular activity. And that may either be in administrative law, or it may be in a statute, but it's part of California law. Well, guess what? Also another big California law called the Coastal Act. And it was adopted by millions of Californians more than once at the ballot box, and then again by our past legislatures and governors. And guess what? Those two constructs and mandates to some degree are in direct conflict with one another. That is why we're in conflict here, because we haven't been able as a state, from governors past on down, to resolve that conflict. We have a mandate to provide recreational opportunities. There's some argument that this area is a great place for that. We also have a mandate to protect environmentally sensitive habitat and species and access and air quality and public health. I think we're fortunate that our understandings change. We evolve. We all evolve. I've evolved. I've learned so much from my colleagues in serving on this commission, not once but twice. There was a time, I'm sure, when mankind believed, understandably so, that the earth was flat and 6,000 years old. We know through experience and knowledge today that neither of those things are true. We believed at one time, with good reason, that if someone was sick, you cut them and made them bleed out the bad stuff. We understand with the passage of time and knowledge and science that all you do is weaken the patient and make them die faster. There maybe was a time when some of the activities we've grown accustomed to embrace and to love and appreciate in doing our off-roading on the coast and in dunes was okay, but we understand and we know more today than we knew then. And we know now what we didn't know then, and that is, this is not sustainable. It's just not sustainable. This is, I believe, Madam Chair, a slow-moving environmental disaster in motion. It is that slow train wreck that we're all standing there watching and we're paralyzed about what to do about it. Because we're all under competing pressures, big political pressure. And I have friends on all sides of this issue, but we have a responsibility to try to resolve it. I have no doubt that the record is pretty robust. The science and the evidence is pretty heavy and clear that there are adverse environmental impacts that are being caused by human activity on this site. That's just a fact. So getting around that. It's also true that there are communities that have been adversely affected, and there are many layers of responsibility around that. Some people enhance their own exposure because they're making dumb decisions, but if their exposure is what it is, it's not going to change, and it's happening because of human activity. It's not just because it's always been that way. It hasn't always been that way, and it certainly hasn't been always this bad. And so those arguments to me are sort of specious. It's like we have a problem, the problem is real, and we have to deal with it. And it's not just about what we used to enjoy with our grandparents, but it's about what are we going to leave for our grandchildren? Because we're a little bit smarter now than we used to be. Now, having said all of those things, I will say this, I also believe in commitment. This agency made a commitment, in fact, it was our idea, to participate in a Coastal Act-related planning process called the Public Works Planning Process. We made a commitment to participate in the process. That process has not run its course. We've had a lot of testimony today that there are people who feel excluded from that process, whether that's local governments, individual groups, whether the dialogue or the communication hasn't been too great. And I'm going to very, very reluctantly support giving that process a chance to complete for a couple of reasons. And I'm going to be candid, not the least of which is that we have some new directors and we have new players in the new administration. And I'm going to be even more candid, that have a very different attitude than some of the folks who were here before. But I got to tell you, I support the recommendations that the staff has made. I don't think they're onerous, and I just want to be clear because I heard a lot of misconceptions today. Nobody is recommending today that we shut down Oceana Dunes. That's not the recommendation before this commission. So if somebody told you that, they told you wrong. That's not the recommendation. The recommendation is to begin to enact some measures that will, in a small way, start to address some of these issues that we all have to work out together. That's what the recommendation is. But we made a commitment, and I believe in honoring commitments. I would like to see, Madam Chair and colleagues, us give this new set of officials at the state and the department the renewed commitment to collaboration a chance, as long as, and I can support that, as long as there is an absolute drop-dead commitment as to when that will be back before this commission, that there's a commitment for quarterly in-person updates to this commission, in-person updates every quarter before this and during this process, that we consider including in part of this process a subcommittee of perhaps the Off-Road Vehicle Commission in the parks, members of that commission, members of this commission, that there's direct dialogue at the principal and staff level, and that we include every one of our recommendations as topics for discussion in the Public Works Plan process. And I will tell you this, speaking for myself, if we come back with a Public Works Plan that doesn't address any of those, I will be the first one to make the motion that we impose them. We are ignoring the elephant in the room. We are kicking the can down the road, and it is our grandchildren that are going to pay the price. I know it's not comfortable. I know it's not fun. I know it's not fun to think about closing off recreation by the beautiful Pacific Ocean, but sometimes we have to just grapple with reality. And that's the reality. And we have a responsibility to future generations to do what is right. And I feel passionately about this. This is insane to me that this conversation has gone on this long. It's incredibly insane. And I will say this, Mr. Ainsworth, I am not at all, and I hate to say this, highly confident that we're going to be able to get around the elephant in the room. I really am. If there's a chance that we can work with parks and find a way to manage this in a way that we can find consistent with the Coastal Act and still allow something to be happening there, we'll pin a medal on you, okay? Maybe a pay raise, I don't know, but we'll pin a medal on you. But I think the reality is there may just be a fundamental reality here, and I know this isn't a popular statement, that ultimately continuing the vehicular use here is simply not compatible with this California law, okay? It may be consistent with a mandate in a different law, but it's not consistent with this law. And so we're not just talking about somebody's opinion here. In a democracy, we are a nation of laws and not of men, as we say, and this is California law. That's the problem we face. We're up against our own law and our own science and our own evolved understanding. Using the vehicles in an environmentally sensitive habitat area simply may violate California law. Now, we might want to change the law. I don't think that'll happen in California. The California voters have adopted and modified the Coastal Act 3 times, as I said, in their millions. Conservatives, liberals, moderates, everybody. Californians do not want their coast messed with from an environmental standpoint. So I doubt we're going to see the law change. So we have to come to grips with this reality. That's the problem we face. We can figure it out. I hope we can. And I'm willing to give it a shot, Mr. Ainsworth. But I got to tell you, I am very concerned that we are just kicking this can down the road. I am going to reluctantly support giving this more time because I have friends and people who've worked in public life and for the state for years that are passionate about Oceano Dunes. And I respect you and I respect that. And I want to give us a chance to try to work together to solve this. But I do want to say, I really am worried. We're just kicking the can down the road and we're ignoring the elephant in the room, and we have to solve this problem. Thank you, Madam Chair.